I'm iCaveDave, and this is iCaveAnswers.
Your Apple questions answered. It's iCaveAnswers with iCaveDave.
First up, Souvik Mukherjee asks, when will you do the next live stream? So, great question. We were planning to do a live stream for the next Apple event on the 23rd of March. So it will be as soon as we have the next Apple event. In the past, we've done a live stream that starts literally as the event finishes. And the main reason for that is if I try and make a regular video that's edited, it takes quite a while to make, it takes quite a long time to edit. And then YouTube is always very slow because everyone is trying to upload their videos at that point. So we're going to go straight for the live stream at that point. Thanks for the question. Joe asks, what is it you want to see in iOS 15? Now, that is a really good question. I hadn't even really given it much thought yet. I think some of the stuff that probably will come in iOS 15 is things like a much easier way of customizing your icons on your home screen of your iPhone or your iPad. And I think it might kind of have like a cloud version. Maybe we'll actually get themes, because it got so popular when everyone discovered that they could use the Shortcuts app in order to replace icons on their iPhones, that I think Apple might have suddenly gone, you know what, this is actually something people want. So maybe that's something that's on the horizon. Other than that, what else would we like to see? I think for the iPad, it would be great to see that multi-user support that we've been asking for so many years. iPads are not something that is necessarily as personal as an iPhone. A lot of households share iPads between different users, so it would be much better if they could receive multiple different phone numbers for iMessage, if they could be logged into multiple different Facebook accounts and social media accounts in general. Especially if Apple was to give them a storage bump, or maybe just not allow it on the bottom level of storage and only on like the mid and higher tier storage. That might make sense, so that you've got multiple user accounts and space for people to store all of their stuff. Other than that, I would love to see the Pro apps coming to iOS 15. So that would be things like Final Cut, maybe Final Cut Go instead of Final Cut Pro, maybe Logic Go, so you kind of get like a better version of video editing than you get with iMovie or with GarageBand, but for audio. But you get more of those features, not quite to the desktop level, but a lot more customization. Maybe the iOS version is where this subscription thing will come in. Who knows? Thanks for your question, Joe. Marcin Kowalczyk asks, iCaveAnswers, would it be probable to think that an ARM 27-inch iMac could come with a beefier variant than just double the performance cores, like the 16 versus 24 core variant, and or with a dedicated GPU? Okay, so right now with the iMacs, there are certainly differences in the performance. So the base level kind of 21.5-inch iMacs do come with Iris internal graphics as part of the Intel CPU, and then the 27-inch ones I think all get dedicated graphics. Now, dedicated versus integrated graphics on Apple Silicon is a little bit different, because half the reason that the Apple Silicon stuff runs so quickly is because the graphics are built into the main processor, and that is why, because they can share the memory and they can share that unified memory pool that's part of the SoC as well. That's part of the reason that they are as quick as they are. So if they were to move it off, perhaps would lose some performance compared to what it would pick up from being dedicated. There's no reason that specifically being dedicated is going to make it better. It seems counterproductive, but in the past, having dedicated graphics meant that the graphics cores were made by someone that purely made graphics cores. Having the integrated ones meant it was kind of just an afterthought from Intel of their integrated graphics for systems that didn't have a separate graphics card. Now, with Apple Silicon, everything is being built from the ground up for these Macs, so I don't think there's any need for us to even differentiate between integrated and dedicated graphics. The GPU cores are dedicated, they run on their own cores, they just happen to be a part of the same die as the main processor. So don't worry about whether it's integrated or not, just worry about how powerful it is. And it looks like these graphics cores are going to be very powerful anyway. So that takes care of the graphics side. I think we're going to be absolutely fine in terms of the graphics. The only systems that might get a dedicated or a separate die for the graphics is probably going to be the Mac Pros. But in terms of the SoC itself, I do think that M1X, the 12 core, is all that you're going to get for iMacs regardless of which size. Now, There might be some differences between the smaller and the larger sizes, but that would be based on binning. So very much like where we have the MacBook Air, which has on the base model 7 graphics cores enabled instead of 8, because you always get some kind of errors in the chip manufacturing, and it just means that more of those chips can be used. If the ones with at least 7 working cores can be repurposed for those, then that's a great way of doing it. It means you only have to do one chip design, which means that you can bring the price down, you can bring your scale up, makes everything much better. So I don't think we will be seeing different processors for the smaller and the larger iMacs, but I do think the lower binned chips might find their way into the lower end iMac, the smaller iMac, because they may not need as much processing power. And also it means that they can get them down to a lower price point. So thank you very much for the question. Cario54321 asks, if the touch bar doesn't disappear, do you see it eventually coming to the MacBook Air and external keyboards? I do think that the touch bar is going to disappear, but I don't think it's going to just disappear entirely. I think it's going to be replaced by the OLED keycaps for that function row, and eventually by probably the whole keyboards being OLED multifunction keys, so you're able to repurpose the keys for different programs. Now, in terms of if it was to stay, I don't think it would roll out to the MacBook Air, because the MacBook Air is designed to be a more kind of on the go, doesn't need all the frills, less bells and whistles, but very, very capable computer for doing most of the stuff that you need, because that's the main kind of differentiator. So right now the touch bar is the main differentiator between the MacBook Air and the MacBook Pro, other than having the extra cooling, slightly better speakers. Most of the other stuff is stuff that most people don't even notice, because the speakers in the current MacBook Air are great. They are slightly better in the MacBook Pro, but most people, unless you're listening to them side by side, would not even notice. So that touch bar is really the thing that defines it as being Pro rather than Air right now. So in terms of that coming to the MacBook Air, I don't see it happening. I also don't see the OLED keycaps coming to the MacBook Air. I also don't see the OLED keycaps coming to the MacBook Air. I think the MacBook Air is going to stay as a basic keyboard. It's got Touch ID now, which is a really handy thing. And in terms of external keyboards, to bring it to those, it would mean that the keyboard would have to have an onboard T2 style processor, something along those lines, which is based on one of the older A series chips, which means that the battery drain on it's going to be a lot higher, and a lot of other factors that would make it less practical. I don't also see that it's that useful for most people, and the fact that Apple hasn't updated what it can do or any of its functionality for the 4 or 5 years that it's existed probably means that Apple is not that enamored by it either. So look out for those OLED keycaps coming to MacBook Pros to replace it. I think that's really what's going to happen. But MacBook Air and external keyboards, I just don't see it happening. John asks, hi Dave, do you think that when the new M1X chips are released, there will be a MacBook Pro 13-inch version, or the new chips will only be available in the 14-inch MacBook Pro, or will it be the Pro 13-inch M1 be discontinued and Apple will start selling the more expensive software versions like they have with Intel, and have the 14-inch MacBook M1X replace the base model with the base price? I ask because the performance gap between the M1 13-inch Pro and the M1 Air has decreased a lot, and I would think that they would just discontinue the 13-inch Pro because the £300 price gap has become more debatable in terms of being justifiable. Okay, so what we're asking here is, will the 14-inch with M1X or a 14-inch with M1 replace the current 13-inch with M1? So what I expect to happen is that the 14-inch with M1X will arrive, along with the 16-inch with M1X. Those will be your $1,800 starting price for the 14-inch, which replaces the 13-inch on the higher spec that we had before with the 4 Thunderbolt ports. The 13-inch with the $1,300 price point stays where it is. The differences between the M1 MacBook Air and MacBook Pro are actually a little bit more than you think. So you've got the larger battery, so you've got longer battery life. You've got the touch bar. You don't have a great deal of performance difference in short-term tasks, but once you get into anything that takes longer than about 10 minutes, so high-end video rendering, Blender rendering, animations, that kind of thing, all of these things, there is a real difference, maybe 10 to 12% in terms of once the MacBook Air starts to throttle. So the MacBook Pro is basically the M1 Mac Mini to go. It's got the nice screen, it's got the brighter screen, there's a whole bunch of little differences, which might not make a difference to you, but going from 17 to 20 hours of battery life can make the difference for people that travel a lot, if you're flying, that kind of thing. So I think there are enough differences. As I say, the 14-inch will come in at the 1800 price point. I think with the extra ports, it's going to have support for more monitors, it's going to have all of that stuff, and obviously the higher performance from the M1X. So I think that's going to be absolutely compelling as it is. 16-inch will probably start at 2300. That's what they currently start at for the 16-inch. So I think that price point will probably carry over. They might even bring that down a little bit because they're not having to buy a GPU and a CPU. They're just buying their own chips, which they make themselves. So there should be savings there. But yeah, that's my take on it. I don't think the 13-inch is going away, certainly not yet. But come September, October, November time, whenever it is that they release M2, that may well go into a 14-inch chassis. We keep the M1 in a 13-inch form factor as a more budget option. Souvik Mukherjee asks, will Apple release another HomePod Mini this year with a newer processor? Also, what about the HomePod Biggie? So HomePod Mini, I don't see that it needs any update. It's not too slow. It works absolutely fine. And bear in mind that the processor within it is actually the same as in the Apple Watch SE. I believe it's the S5 processor, which is an Apple Watch processor. That's all it needs though, because all it needs is Siri to work, and it needs to be able to do Wi-Fi. It needs to be able to grab the music and play it. That's all it needs to do. So the S5 SoC is absolutely adequate for what it needs. In terms of HomePod Biggie, I don't see that anything's going to happen there because they've discontinued it. I don't see that they would be discontinuing it if they were about to release a new version. They would just keep selling it until the new version came out, or say it's out of stock and coming back into stock soon, like they do with all the laptops, and all of a sudden the new one arrives and that's what you get. So I don't see much changing on the HomePod front, I'm afraid. I think that is what we've got for now. HomePod Minis, they may well have something else coming out. It might be more of a home smart hub thing that includes a speaker, or maybe they're going to do something along the lines of Amazon Echo Look or whatever it's called, which is their kind of version with a screen. Maybe they're going to do like a standalone iPad that lives in your kitchen. Maybe it's going to be something along those lines. We never know really what Apple's got up their sleeves, but that is the kind of thing that I could see them doing. And WilliamPhillippe asks, U1 in the Apple Watch presumably would be used to alert you if you moved out of range of your companion iPhone. Apple Watch can be used to locate/ping an iPhone, but the reverse isn't true. This is where I see U1 being used. So yeah, right now in general, your Apple Watch is going to be either on your wrist or it's going to be on charge. There's very little chance of losing an Apple Watch while you're out and about. I do see that they may well put into it the AirTag technology down the line, so you would be able to set it to lost mode from your phone, and then it would use the Find My network from around it. We've done a lot of talk about how the AirTags work. I think that's probably the way that they would do it. I can't imagine that you would ping your watch with the iPhone, because the speaker on it is not particularly loud. Anywhere that's vaguely noisy, you probably wouldn't hear it. I don't think that it particularly needs it, because it's very unlikely to get lost in that way. Having the tracking capability of an AirTag would be good, because if you perhaps drop it in a bar or something, don't realise because you've had a few beers, then maybe that is more likely a case where you would need it, and it would be able to locate itself using the iPhones around it. And Michael Wright asks, iCaveAnswers, have you had any hiccups or glitches worth mentioning on your Mac Mini? I see a lot of noise about Bluetooth issues, wondering if I should go with a wired keyboard and mouse. So for what everyone calls a first generation product, it has been incredibly smooth sailing. Now, the only things that we have had very slight issues is with the first version of Big Sur, and I think possibly 11.1. We did have some disconnection issues with the keyboard and trackpad, so I just kept a wired keyboard and mouse plugged in as well, but they were kind of hidden away under my monitor, and I had to use them I think twice. So it wasn't big issues. It's very much like when your batteries just run out of a little bit of charge and you have to reconnect them in the normal way. There was one time when they would not reconnect, so I had to shut it down and then restart it, and they reconnected straight away. but that seems to have been completely resolved with the software updates that have been done, so that is not a concern that I think anyone should have now. In terms of wired keyboard and mouse, if you've got the ports available, I kind of prefer wired keyboard and mouse in general. You tend to not get any lag and things like that. Not that we've had any with this. As things start to get a little bit busier sometimes, when your system is busy, you can get a little bit of lag going on. Other than that, display-wise, we had a couple of times when this bottom display, which is the 4K panel, disconnected, and when it reconnects, it thinks it's a 1080p panel, which is very strange. I'm not sure if that's an issue with the cable that I'm using or if it's actually a Mac Mini thing, but simply unplugging the USB-C and plugging it straight back in seems to have reset that every single time. So again, not a game changer, but a little bit of an annoyance, if anything. But other than that, absolutely no problems. So yeah, been really, really reliable so far. Really enjoying using it. So that's it for today's iCave Answers. If you've got a question you would like me to answer, all you need to do, hit me up down in the comments using the hashtag iCaveAnswers, and I will answer it on a future show for you. Assuming that it's a question that makes some sort of sense. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.